We are the generation that sends messages across the globe in milliseconds, but still struggles to truly connect. We can simulate the birth of galaxies in supercomputers, yet fail to recognize the birth of empathy in our own hearts. We decode the fabric of space-time, but remain confused about the nature of our own consciousness. Strange, isn't it? That with all our telescopes pointed toward the stars, so many of us still feel lost here on Earth. There's a dissonance humming beneath the surface of modern life, a quiet, persistent knowing that something fundamental is shifting. Not in headlines or markets, but in the very way we perceive reality. Some people describe it as an awakening. Others feel it more as an unsettling urge, a gravitational pull toward a life that doesn't yet have a name. And in this paradox of technological power amid spiritual disorientation emerges the question at the heart of today's exploration. Have some among us already crossed over to a new Earth? And if so, could you be next? Let's not take this idea lightly. This isn't about fantasy. This isn't about rapture or escape. This is about evolution, not of our biology, but of our perception. And perception, as any physicist will tell you, defines reality. Now, imagine this. Our physical senses are designed for survival, not truth. The human eye can see less than 1/10,000,000th of the electromagnetic spectrum. The brain, brilliant as it is, interprets a sliver of reality and then tells you, this is the world. But what if the world we know is just one version among manyech, defined by frequency, resonance, and perspective? We call this the third dimension, not because it's the only one, but because it's the one we've collectively agreed to operate within. A reality calibrated around polarity, good and bad, right and wrong, success and failure. It's a reality that has served us well for a time, but now people are sensing that this model is reaching its limits. Just as Newton's laws were eventually expanded by Einstein's theory of relativity, our framework for human existence is being challenged by new experiences, new understandings, and yes, new vibrations. You see, science doesn't exist in opposition to spirituality. It exists to illuminate the mechanics of the universe, both outer and inner. In the quantum world, particles behave differently when observed. In the relativistic world, time bends around mass. And in the human world, consciousness shapes experience. So, if enough minds begin to shift toward empathy, toward unity, toward deeper awareness, what happens to reality itself? That is the question posed by thinkers like Dolores Cannon, whose work in hypnotherapy unexpectedly cracked open a view into what some describe as the new Earth. But before you roll your eyes at the term, let me invite you to look at it differently, not as a place, but as a perspective. A consciousness that operates at a higher bandwidth. A frequency where cooperation replaces competition, where presence overcomes distraction, where love is no longer a reaction, but a constant field in which we exist. If this sounds poetic, that's because it is. But it's also deeply rational. Because when systems reach a saturation point, be they galaxies, societies, or psyches, they either collapse or evolve. And right now, humanity is teetering between collapse and evolution. The choice is still ours. But the clock, cosmically speaking, is ticking. So, what does it mean to cross over to this so-called new Earth? It doesn't mean dying. It doesn't mean boarding a spaceship. It doesn't even mean changing your zip code. It means changing your wavelength. It's what happens when you stop being seduced by noise and start tuning into signal. When you stop asking, what can I get? And start wondering, what can I become? It's what happens when you move from reaction to response, from fear to curiosity, from division to integration. It's the moment you realize that duality, the idea that you are separate from everyone and everything, is not an eternal truth, but a useful illusion. One that served us well in our adolescence as a species, but one we must now outgrow. Because duality gave us progress, yes, but it also gave us war. It gave us identity, but also isolation. It gave us reason, but at the cost of wonder. The new Earth, if such a thing is unfolding, isn't a utopia delivered by prophecy. It is a possibility constructed through participation. And participation, as any astrophysicist will tell you, starts with alignment. Just as stars must reach a precise balance of gravity and pressure to ignite, you too must balance your inner forces to awaken. That awakening doesn't arrive like lightning. It dawns slowly, like morning mist lifting from a sleeping planet. You may begin to notice that the things which once triggered you no longer hold the same power. You may feel inexplicably drawn to nature, silence, or contemplation. You may begin to see connections where others see coincidence, to hear harmony where others hear chaos. These are not signs of fantasy. They are indicators of frequency shift. Biologists call it adaptation. Mystics call it ascension. But regardless of the label, the mechanics remain the same. You become attuned to a higher order of being. Think of it this way. In music, a C note played on one instrument can cause the same note to vibrate on another instrument nearby. It's called resonance. Likewise, when enough human beings begin to embody compassion, presence, and clarity, they create a field that others naturally resonate with. That is how worlds change, with declarations, but with harmonics. We are, after all, vibrational beings. Your brain emits waves. Your heart radiates electromagnetic fields. You are not a static structure. You are a dynamic symphony of particles, thoughts, and intent is the tuning fork of consciousness. So when Dolores Cannon spoke of a new Earth, she wasn't just describing another version of paradise. She was pointing to an evolutionary threshold zone that we, knowingly or not, are rapidly approaching. And here's the most fascinating part. Both the old Earth and the new Earth exist simultaneously, just like multiple quantum states in superposition. Which version you experience depends entirely on what you observe, how you participate, and what you resonate with. It's not magic, it's physics. And choice is the operator. Are you still reacting from fear, still identifying with division, still clinging to certainty in a universe built on probabilities? Then you're likely rooted in the old Earth paradigm. But if you've begun to soften into awareness, to open into complexity, to live as if your very presence is a vote for the future, then you're already crossing over. Many already have. You can see it in their eyes, hear it in their words, feel it in their presence. They are not better. They are not enlightened gurus floating above the crowd. They are ordinary people scientists, parents, artists, teachers who have quietly stepped out of the gravity well of unconsciousness and into orbit around something much bigger than themselves. Not perfection, but presence. And maybe, just maybe, you are next in line. But let's be honest. Crossing over isn't easy. In fact, evolution never is. It's not a button you push or a seminar you attend. It's an internal recalibration, dismantling of all the mental scaffolding that once made you feel safe. And at first, it's disorienting because before you can ascend, you must first question everything you thought was solid. You begin to ask, what if success isn't status but self-awareness? What if intelligence isn't measured by how much you know, but by how deeply you understand? What if love isn't a transaction, but a foreseen organizing principle of the cosmos, as constant as gravity? The more you inquire, the more the old paradigms unravel. You start seeing through the veil of cultural conditioning. You start noticing how fear masquerades as logic, how convenience masquerades as progress, and how distraction has become a substitute for wonder. And that, my friends, is when things get interesting. Because now your questions are no longer rhetorical. They are catalytic. You begin living differently, not because someone told you to, but because the old way starts to feel like an ill-fitting suit. You walk into a crowded room and instead of seeking attention, you seek coherence. You're less interested in who's right and more interested in what's real. And real, you discover, has less to do with facts and more to do with frequency. Now, let's clarify something. We are not talking about bypassing reality. We are not advocating the rejection of science or logic. In fact, the exact opposite. We are honoring them because science in its truest form, is not a body of facts, it's a method of awakening. It is the courage to ask, again and again, what else might be true. And the truth emerging is this: consciousness is not a side effect of biology, it is the substrate of reality itself. For centuries, we've believed the brain produces consciousness the way a light bulb produces light. But emerging research suggests otherwise. Consciousness may be more like the electrical field that powers the bulb ever present, but only made visible through form. If that's true, then we're not in the universe. We are the universe local expressions of a vast field of awareness, having temporary experiences in the sandbox of time. So the idea of New Earth isn't a break from science, it's the next chapter of it. Consider this. In physics, every electron has the potential to exist in multiple states until observed. This is known as superposition. Similarly, every moment in your life contains multiple potential realities. Which one you collapse into depends on your attention, your intention, your emotional frequency. You don't just experience reality, you participate in its construction. Now imagine 8 billion people waking up to that fact. What would that do to our politics, our economics, our education systems, our treatment of each other? And here's the rub: you don't need to wait for the world to change. You are the world changing. The tipping point doesn't begin in courtrooms or boardrooms, it begins in bedrooms, in silent moments, in internal shifts too small to be televised. Every time you choose empathy over judgment, curiosity over certainty, patience over panic, you shift the field. In physics, this is known as the observer effect. The act of observation changes the phenomenon being observed. In psychology, it's called metacognition, the awareness of one's own awareness. And in practical terms, it's called awakening. But awakening isn't a singular moment. It's a process, a constant reorientation toward clarity, a slow migration from unconscious reaction to conscious response. Sometimes it arrives with a thunderclap of loss, a breakthrough, a near-death experience, but more often it unfolds in whispers, a walk in the woods, a passage in a book, a child's question that breaks open your heart. You start to feel things differently. Cities seem louder, time seems faster, but nature somehow becomes more magnetic. Trees feel older, stars feel closer, your senses recalibrate. Your inner compass begins to turn away from noise and toward signal. That's when you begin to live like a tuning fork. You don't try to change people, you simply hold your frequency. And those ready to shift will naturally resonate with you. You'll begin to notice something remarkable. The old patterns that used to define your resentment, fear, impatience start to lose their grip. Not because you're forcing them away, but because you're vibrating beyond their range. This isn't mysticism. This is resonance. And in the language of physics, resonance isn't magic, it's mathematics. So here's a thought experiment. What if Earth itself is undergoing a vibrational shift? Not metaphorically, but literally. What if the frequency of the planet measurable in terms of Schumann resonance and geomagnetic fluctuations is rising? And what if those changes are prompting a biological and psychological recalibration in its inhabitants? It would explain a lot, wouldn't it? Why so many people are questioning everything, why mental health is in crisis, why systems that once felt solid are now cracking. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Now, let's return to the metaphor of dimensional shift. Think of the third dimension as a classroom. Duality is the curriculum, suffering is the teacher, and love is the final exam. Once you learn the lesson, you no longer need to repeat the grade. You don't leave the building, but your perspective changes. The same world appears different because you're not looking at it. You're looking from a different place within it. You stop seeing enemies and start seeing unhealed parts of yourself reflected in others. You stop chasing meaning outside and start cultivating it from within. You stop reacting to chaos and start anchoring peace. This is the hallmark of those who have crossed over. Not perfection, but presence. Not escape, but embodiment. They still face challenges. They still feel pain, but they are no longer defined by it. They move through life with a certain gravity, not the kind that pulls you down, but the kind that holds you steady. And maybe As you listen to these words, something in you is remembering what you came here to become. Because here's the cosmic joke. The new earth isn't somewhere you go, it's someone you become. Becoming someone new doesn't require abandoning who you were. It requires understanding who you've always been beneath the roles, beneath the masks, beneath the ego's scripted performance. And that is not always a comfortable experience. Because ego, as biology would have it, was never designed for enlightenment. It was designed for survival. It wants identity, not ambiguity. It wants certainty, not curiosity. It wants approval, not authenticity. And yet, what the new earth demands is precisely what the ego resists: surrender. Not surrender in the military sense, not waving a flag or giving up, but the surrender that happens when a caterpillar dissolves inside its chrysalis, not knowing what it will become, only that it cannot stay what it was. That surrender, in this in-between space, this vibrational corridor-rolled attachments fall away. The desire to win every argument, the craving to be seen, the obsession with proving your worth through productivity or praise. These are not evils, they are echoes, ghosts of a consciousness shaped by fear. But fear, like dark matter, only appears to dominate because we haven't fully understood it. When illuminated, fear often reveals itself as unintegrated love. Love withheld, love distorted, love forgotten. So the path forward is not to destroy the ego. That's a common misconception. You don't need to defeat your mind to awaken. You need to include it in something larger. Just as Newton's laws still apply within Einstein's, your ego still functions within awakened consciousness, but it no longer drives the ship. Instead, the captain becomes something deeper. Call it awareness. Call it soul. Call it the quiet intelligence behind your breath. It doesn't shout, it doesn't debate, but when you listen, truly listen, it reorganizes your entire trajectory. This internal shift has external consequences. You begin to make decisions not based on fear or status, but on alignment. You may find yourself leaving environments that once defined you. You may walk away from relationships that no longer resonate, not with malice, but with a reverence for truth. You stop asking, what do I get from this? And start asking, who am I becoming through this? That one question opens portals. It shifts your relationship with time. No longer just a sequence of tasks. Time becomes space to evolve, to witness, to respond. Your calendar becomes less about obligations and more about energy. You realize that saying yes to everything is often just a clever way of saying no to yourself. And here's where the science returns. In quantum mechanics, the observer collapses probabilities into actualities. The active attention creates reality, and your attention, when refined by presence, becomes a force of unimaginable creative power. You begin to notice synchronicities, those meaningful coincidences that seem too precise to be random. A book shows up just as you need it. A stranger says exactly what you've been wondering. A challenge arises that perfectly mirrors your inner work. These aren't miracles. They're mathematics, the subtle feedback loops of a self-aware universe responding to its own awareness. In astrophysics, feedback loops drive cosmic evolution. Black holes influence galaxy formation. Supernovas seed future stars. Systems affect themselves. Consciousness is no different. When you shift your inner state, the field around you shifts as well. Not because the universe is sentimental, but because it is coherent. And coherence is contagious. This is why crossing over doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There are no parades, no flashing lights, no divine certificates. It looks like someone who used to be reactive becoming still. Someone who once needed validation, choosing solitude. Someone who carried pain, choosing to forgive not because they forgot, but because they remembered their wholeness. The old model told you that healing comes from fixing what's broken. But in the New Earth paradigm, healing is remembering that you were never broken to begin with, only misidentified. You're not the wound, you're the witness. You're not the story, you're the space it unfolds in. And once you reclaim that space, everything changes. Not instantly, but irreversibly. Because reality bends to consciousness like space-time bends to gravity. It may take a while to notice, but the shift is inevitable. Even your biology begins to respond. Studies show that consistent emotional states like gratitude, compassion, our structure, the neural pathways in your brain, your immune system strengthens, your hormones balance, your stress patterns recede. You're not just changing your mind, you're rewriting your body. Imagine that. The same way the cosmos forms stars through collapse and ignition, your nervous system rewires itself through attention and intention. And let's not forget, you're made of stars. Literally. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe, they were all forged in the heart of ancient stars that died so you could live. So when we talk about ascending to a new Earth, we're not talking about floating away. We're talking about remembering that you already belong to the cosmos. You are its conscious continuation, which brings us to responsibility. Because once you remember your cosmic roots, the way you engage with the world must change. You can no longer pretend that your actions don't ripple. You can't unknow what you now know. Responsibility becomes less about obligation and more about stewardship. You are no longer just a passenger on this planet. You are a caretaker of its frequency. You begin to live more simply, not because you're against abundance, but because you've redefined what abundance means. It's not more stuff. It's more space, more freedom, more connection, more presence. You find yourself drawn to conversations that nourish rather than impress, relationships that expand rather than distract, environments that energize rather than deplete. You may still live in a city, use technology, run a business. The outer form may look the same, but the quality of attention you bring to every act is radically different. You're no longer hustling to escape the moment. You're showing up to inhabit it. And that, my friend, is the essence of the new Earth. Not a location, but a dimension of being. One that emerges through your perception, your choices, your willingness to evolve. It's the moment you stop seeing yourself as a victim of the world and start realizing you are the world. You are the echo of its birth and the blueprint of its future. And the question now isn't whether you're worthy to cross over. The question is, are you willing? Let's imagine for a moment that Earth is not just a planet, but a stage upon which consciousness comes to learn, to love, to create. And like all great stages, this one has acts. We, right now, are standing at the edge of one act closing and another beginning. The signs are everywhere, not in the headlines, which scream louder than they understand, but in the spaces in between. A restlessness in the soul of humanity, a longing that no algorithm, no promotion, no geopolitical policy seems able to satisfy. It's as if beneath all the noise, something is calling. Now, in cosmology, we study something called phase transitions. When the early universe cooled, it underwent a series of phase changes like steam condensing into water or water freezing into ice. These transitions created entirely new conditions of existence. They were quiet, irreversible, and transformative. That is what is happening now, not in the vacuum of space, but in the vacuum of inner space, a phase shift of human awareness. Not everyone will make the transition at the same time, not because some are chosen and others are not, but because consciousness, like matter, responds to heat, and some souls are simply ready to boil. What emerges is not division, but divergence. Some will continue in the 3D paradigm, defined by scarcity, fear, and separation, not as punishment, but as choice. Because the universe, elegant and impartial, honors free will with the precision of physics. Others will migrate subtly, energetically into a new state of awareness. Their outer lives may still look familiar, but their inner landscape will be fundamentally rewired. They will move slower, but with more purpose. Speak less, but with more meaning. Want less, but feel more full. They won't reject the world. They'll recompose it. You see, the new Earth isn't just about escaping a broken system. It's about replacing the operating system altogether. And not through revolution, but through resonance. No need to argue with the old. Just outgrow it. That's how evolution works. In evolutionary biology, species adapt not by fighting the old environment, but by attuning to a new one. The ones who survive are not the strongest or smartest, but the most responsive, the most aligned. So too with us. This isn't survival of the fittest, it's emergence of the most aware. And if you're still listening, still resonating with this message, then chances are you're already feeling that emergence within you. But here's the most humbling part. No one does this alone. Awakening is not an individual event, it's a collective field. We rise together, not because we agree on everything, but because we commit to something higher than opinion, understanding. In astrophysics, gravitational waves travel vast distances, rippling space-time itself. And just like those waves, the subtle shift in one awakened heart creates tremors across the human field. Your compassion matters, your stillness matters, your choice to be conscious, present, and kindachos beyond anything you can measure. So what does it mean to be next in line for the new Earth? It means becoming a tuning fork for coherence in a world addicted to chaos. It means walking into a storm with the poise of the eye at its center. It means being less interested in having answers and more committed to asking better questions. It means becoming someone whose very presence reminds others of who they are not, by preaching, but by being. It means taking radical responsibility for your perception, because perception is creation, and how you see the world is the world you live in. So maybe the new Earth doesn't arrive with a bang. Maybe it arrives with a choice. 1,000 small choices made every day to breathe before reacting, to listen before speaking, to forgive when it's not deserved, to give without calculating, to love without needing to be right, to walk through your life as if everything is sacred, not because it is, but because you've decided to treat it that way. That is the consciousness of the new Earth, and it's available now. But no one can cross over for you. No teacher, no guru, no book, not even the cosmos. The universe expands, but it does not intrude. It offers endlessly, but it does not impose. And so here we are on this strange, beautiful planet, spinning through the dark with 8 billion stories unfolding. Some of us are awakening, some of us are remembering, some of us are still sleeping. But the invitation remains the same. It does not shout, it whispers, rise, not because you are broken, but because you are becoming. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Earth was always for. Not just life, but awakening. Not just survival, but evolution. Not just a place in the cosmos, but a mirror for consciousness to see itself. So I ask you again, in all sincerity, not as a scientist or philosopher, but as a fellow traveler on this pale blue dot. Many have already crossed over to New Earth. Could you be next in line?